Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really fundamental for any resilient organization.
Hmm.
How do we actually connect and, work with the outside world when things go sideways?
Yeah, the external piece. It's critical.
We're digging into DRI International's professional practices, specifically page 32, focusing on professional practice 10, coordinating with external agencies and resources.
Exactly. And, it's really important to remember this doesn't exist on its own.
Right.
You've got to think back to professional practice 5, incident preparedness and response. You need your internal plan sorted before you can effectively link up externally. They're two sides of the same coin, really.
Absolutely. Like having your first aid kit ready at home before you figure out who to call if the whole street's affected.
Good analogy.
So our mission for this deep dive is to get a clear picture of the objectives here, what the professional's role actually involves, and crucially, the specific activities needed to make this coordination work. We're kind of learning this together as we go.
Sounds good. Let's start with the main goal, the objective of practice 10.
Okay.
Fundamentally, it's all about setting up policies and procedures. Why? To make sure your response activities line up with the right public entities and private resources.
And that connection back to practice 5 again.
Always. It has to be in accordance with that internal incident preparedness and response framework you've already built.
Okay, so translating that, what does it actually mean on the ground for someone managing business continuity?
Well, at its heart, it means having a clear, documented way your organization talks to and works with outside help during a disruption.
So not just a list of numbers.
Definitely not. It's much more proactive. It's about building the framework, the rules, the steps, so that coordination is smooth before you desperately need it.
That makes a lot of sense. So within the organization, who's driving this? What's the BC professional actually tasked with here?
Well, the practices outline 3 main roles for the professional. First up, they need to identify and establish the organization's own incident response procedures. And, like we keep saying, this has to align with professional practice 5. That internal foundation is just paramount.
Right, so you can't just wait for the fire department to tell you what your first steps should be. You need your own plan first.
Exactly. What's the second role?
The second role is about looking outward, identifying the relevant guidelines for incident preparedness and response, and knowing which agencies actually have jurisdiction over your entity.
Jurisdiction. Okay. So understanding the whole regulatory picture you're operating in.
Precisely. Who are the official players you need to be aware of, maybe report to or coordinate with?
That sounds like it could be quite a bit of digging, depending on the organization. It's not just who might help, but who officially oversees things.
Yeah, exactly. What sort of agencies are we typically talking about, broadly?
We'll get into specifics, but
Yeah.
you're thinking public health bodies, maybe environmental agencies, fire marshals, police, specific industry regulators, anyone who has a formal say in how you handle certain incidents.
Got it. Okay, that clarifies things. And the third key role for the professional.
The third one is really about action. Actively coordinating the organization's incident response procedures with those external agencies and resources.
So being proactive, not just knowing who they are, but actually building bridges.
That's it. Building those relationships, opening communication lines before the pressure's on. It's incredibly valuable.
Okay, let's shift to the actual activities then. The how-to. The first one loops right back to that first role. Identify and establish your internal response procedures.
Okay.
Seems practice 5 really is the starting block.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
You can't coordinate externally if your own house isn't in order, right?
Right.
PP5 walks you through figuring out threats, setting up your command structure, defining who does what internally. That clarity inside is non-negotiable for effective external coordination.
Okay, so activity 1, get your internal ducks in a row based on PP5. Then activity 2 focuses outward again. Identify those external guidelines and agencies with jurisdiction. You mentioned broad categories, but the document gives examples.
Yes, and this is where it gets tailored. The document lists things like public health agencies could be facility officials who have some oversight,
Yeah.
definitely fire marshals, law enforcement, local, state, federal maybe. Industry regulators think finance, healthcare, energy, occupational safety, and health bodies, OSHA, for example, and other government groups. The key is it really depends on your sector, where you are, and what kind of trouble you might realistically face.
Makes sense. A chemical plants list will look very different from, say, a software company's.
Totally different.
The document also talks about identifying requirements for submitting facility info, what kind of info, and why share it ahead of time.
Good question. It could be things like building layouts, how many people are usually there, any hazardous materials you handle or store,
Right.
details about your fire safety systems, maybe even summaries of your own emergency plans. Sharing this with agencies, especially first responders like the fire department, helps them understand your risks before they show up.
It's like giving them the blueprints beforehand,
That-
pre-incident intelligence.
exactly. It helps them respond faster and safer if something happens.
And it's not just a one-off data dump, is it? It mentions understanding requirements for periodic inspections, exercises, training frequency too.
Precisely. Regulations often require regular safety inspections. Plus, some authorities might mandate or strongly suggest you run drills, test your plans periodically. They might even specify how often or what kind of training staff need. Knowing those rules is vital for compliance.
And keeping your plans from just gathering dust.
Right.
Another really practical point, identifying requirements and deadlines for mandatory incident reporting. This sounds super critical, legally speaking.
Oh, absolutely. Depending on what happens, you might be legally required to report it to certain authorities within a strict time frame. Miss that deadline, and you could face serious penalties.
Ouch.
Yeah. So knowing exactly what to report, who to report it to, and by when is just fundamental responsible management.
So, okay, you've gathered all this external intel rules, regulations, reporting needs. What's the next logical step?
The next step, according to the practices, is to take all that and use it to develop, or more likely, update your internal emergency procedures to make sure they comply.
Ah, connecting the external back to the internal plan.
Exactly. And this usually means working closely with your compliance folks, your legal team, to ensure everything's buttoned up and aligns with the law. It's about making those external rules actionable inside your organization.
And this isn't a set it and forget it kind of thing, I imagine. The document talks about ongoing monitoring.
Absolutely not. Laws change, regulations evolve. So your program needs a process to keep track of relevant updates and then, crucially, tweak your internal procedures to stay compliant. It's a continuous cycle.
Okay, makes sense. And one final point before you start reaching out externally. Getting leadership approval for these procedures involving external parties. Why is that executive sign-off so important?
Well, leadership approval gives the whole effort organizational weight, authority. It shows the company is serious about collaborating externally and will provide the necessary resources.
So it's about mandate and support.
Exactly. It embeds this external coordination as a key part of the overall BEC strategy, not just some side project.
Okay, groundwork laid. Internal plan solid, external landscape understood. Now for activity 3, actually coordinating incident response with those external agencies. First step mentioned is figuring out who's likely to be the first responder for different scenarios.
That's right. Think about your likely incidents. Fire. Who comes first? Probably the fire department. Medical emergency. Paramedics. Security issue. Law enforcement.
So identifying that initial point of contact.
Yeah. Knowing who's most likely rolling up first helps you prioritize where you focus your initial coordination and how you tailor your communication.
Makes sense. Then, once you know who you're likely dealing with first, the next step is developing and documenting your emergency alerting procedures, how you actually notify them, and what info they need. Examples given were hazmat releases, injuries.
Yeah, these documented procedures need to be crystal clear. How do you notify them? When? Who in your organization makes the call? What specific information do they absolutely need right away?
And the right channels to use.
Exactly. You might have, say, a legally required way to report a major chemical spill to the EPA versus how you'd call 911 for a fire. It needs to be documented.
This next point feels really proactive, moving beyond just procedures. Identifying specific people in those agencies and building liaison relationships. That's more than just having the main switchboard number.
Oh, definitely. It's about getting past the generic contact list. It's about building actual human connections.
Knowing a name, maybe having a direct line.
Precisely. Knowing Sergeant Miller at the local precinct or having Captain Eva Rostova from the fire department's direct contact, that can make a massive difference in a crisis. Communication becomes faster, more direct, more effective when time is critical.
And taking that relationship building even further, the document suggests inviting first responders to tour your facilities and maybe offer suggestions. That sounds like a brilliant idea for building trust.
It's hugely valuable. Get firefighters, paramedics, police inside before there's an emergency. Let them see the layout, potential hazards, how your internal teams operate.
So they're familiar if they ever have to respond for real.
Exactly. And their expert eyes might spot things you've missed in your own planning. It improves your preparedness and makes that future joint response much smoother, much safer.
Okay, bringing it back inside for a moment. The document reminds us to link this external coordination back to our internal incident roles and responsibilities, the ones we defined back in PP5. How do those internal roles mesh with external agencies during an event?
Well, during an incident, you'll have specific people internally designated as the main contacts for external agencies. This avoids confusion, ensures consistent messaging.
So one point person talks to the fire chief, another talks to law enforcement. Something like that. Maybe your incident commander liaises with the fire department lead on scene, while your security head coordinates with the police commander. Those specific external-facing communication roles need to be clearly defined in your plan.
Got it. Now, this next activity feels like where the rubber really meets the road. Coordinating, conducting, and participating in exercises and tests with external agencies. This is way beyond an internal drill, isn't it?
Oh yeah, miles beyond. The absolute best way to make sure a coordination works under pressure is to practice it realistically.
So, running a joint exercise.
Exactly. A simulated evacuation with the fire department participating. A cyber drill involving the regional cybercrime unit, whatever makes sense for your risks. It lets everyone see how the other operates, spot communication gaps in a safe space, and build that crucial familiarity and trust.
Makes the real thing much less chaotic, hopefully.
That's the goal. It significantly boosts the effectiveness of a real response.
And like any good exercise, there's the follow-up. Debriefing, documenting results, lessons learned, and figuring out actions for improvement. Absolutely critical. After a joint exercise, everyone involved, your teams, their teams, needs to sit down and talk, frankly. What worked, what didn't? Where can we tighten up the coordination?
And write it down.
Yes. Documenting those lessons and creating a concrete action plan to fix any weaknesses is how you drive continuous improvement in that coordinated response.
And those results, those action plans, they aren't just for the BC team's filing cabinet, are they? It mentions sharing this with leadership and other relevant functions.
Right. You need to show leadership the value of these exercises.
Yeah.
It keeps their support strong, ensures resources are available. Plus, other departments like safety, security, legal, they need to know the state of play and if any procedures need updating based on the exercise outcomes.
Visibility and buy-in across the board.
Exactly.
And finally, closing the loop. All those lessons learned, all the feedback from exercises, or even real incidents gets fed back into updating the incident response plans themselves, following your regular maintenance schedule, probably linked to PP8.
That's the continuous improvement cycle right there. Insights from practice, from real events, go straight back into refining the plans and procedures.
Making them living documents.
Precisely. It keeps them current, relevant, effective. That iterative process is absolutely fundamental to building an organization that can actually handle disruptions well.
So, wrapping up our deep dive on Professional Practice 10, it really boils down to making sure your organization isn't isolated when a crisis hits. It's about proactively setting yourself up to work smoothly with that whole ecosystem of external help. Internal plans are vital, yes, but so is knowing who else shows up and having practiced ways to work together.
Couldn't say it better.
Yeah.
It's about understanding your obligations, building those relationships proactively, and practicing the coordinated response. So when something does happen, everyone, internal and external, knows their part and how to effectively work together to minimize the damage and speed up recovery.
That's a fantastic summary. So for you listening, maybe take a moment to think. Who are the specific external agencies your organization would most likely need to coordinate with in different scenarios? And what's maybe one small, concrete first step you could take, maybe even this week, to start building or strengthening one of those key relationships, something to mull over? Thanks for tuning in to The Deep Dive.